Donald Trump didn't tweet. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he reached for something older, something ceremonial. A letter. Thick cardstock, presidential seal, ink that didn't scream but whispered power. It was addressed simply, Chairman Kim. There were no hashtags, no slogans, only a message, folded precisely, delivered quietly. No one expected him to write again. Not after the silence. Not after the failure in Hanoi. But there it was. A letter. Not from the President of the United States, but from the man who once claimed they fell in love. The delivery took place in a carpeted room within the North Korean mission at the United Nations in New York. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The American diplomat slid the envelope across the table slowly, as if placing a chess piece. The North Korean representative, stone-faced, meticulous, did not flinch. He nodded once, picked up the envelope, examined its weight, and placed it back on the table. Not opened, not pocketed, just left there, a diplomatic orphan. Seconds passed, then minutes. The silence grew thicker than the carpet beneath them. Outside, cameras waited for reactions. Inside, that envelope sat like a forgotten relic, unacknowledged but fully seen. It was a performance, and the performance was the point. North Korea didn't tear it, didn't return it, didn't respond. It simply withheld. In diplomacy, withholding is a message, and this one rang loud. By evening, headlines broke like glass. Trump sends personal letter to Kim Jong-un, ignored at UN. From love letters to cold shoulders, news anchors speculated. Analysts dissected the silence. Was this a calculated snub? A rejection of Trump's return to relevance? Or had Kim Jong-un simply moved on, toward Moscow, toward Beijing, away from Mar-a-Lago sentimentality? The letter's contents remained unknown, but that was never the point. What mattered was the gesture and the reply that never came, or perhaps came in the form of stillness. Trump's team released a brief statement. President Trump continues to believe in dialogue, a line that felt more like a placeholder than a belief. What he didn't say? That silence wasn't new. It was just louder this time. And somewhere in Florida, the man who once called him a friend probably watched the news tickers alone, wondering, was the letter too late? Or was it never enough?
For those who remembered, this wasn't the first time a message crossed oceans between these two men. In 2018, Trump had called Kim honorable. In return, Kim sent letters laced with poetic overtures and respectful barbs. The media called it bizarre. Trump called it chemistry. But somewhere between summits and soundbites, something cracked. Hanoi was the fracture. Kim expected sanctions relief. Trump wanted full denuclearization. Neither blinked. Talks ended abruptly. And after that, their so-called relationship faded into diplomatic mist. But now, years later, Trump reached out again. Why? Was it nostalgia? Legacy? Or a calculated move as he circled back into campaign headlines? The timing wasn't lost on anyone. With Russia growing bolder and China tightening its grip, Trump knew the optics. A renewed connection with Kim could signal strength or chaos, depending on who interpreted it. Meanwhile, North Korea had changed. It wasn't the isolated, reactive regime it once was. It had tested missiles that reached farther. It had met with Russian Defense Minister Shoigu. It had survived a pandemic with ironclad borders. In its silence, it had evolved. And with each passing year, Kim's posture grew less reactive, more strategic. The letter on the table symbolized more than rejection. It symbolized a shift in power dynamics. Kim no longer needed Trump to feel relevant. Perhaps the reverse was true now. In Pyongyang, there was no official response, no televised message, no parade, just more silence. And yet, silence in diplomacy is never absence. It's architecture. It's the way nations redraw their lines without ink. And in this silence, Kim was saying, the era of theater is over. In Mar-a-Lago, aides said Trump was unbothered. But even his allies couldn't ignore the optics. The man who once claimed to have solved North Korea was now being ghosted by it, and worse, in public. Back at the UN, the envelope was eventually removed, unceremoniously, without fanfare. No one knows who took it, but cameras didn't miss it. A quiet symbol disappearing under fluorescent lights, a reminder that gestures without ground are just paper. And still, no word from Kim.
As the hours passed and the envelope quietly vanished from the UN table, the silence left behind grew louder. This wasn't just a moment, it was a shift. North Korea didn't tear the letter. They didn't send it back. They simply didn't acknowledge it. And in global diplomacy, that's not nothing, that's everything. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's measured in what you choose not to say. Inside Pyongyang's high-security briefing rooms, analysts pored over Western media reactions. On state monitors, images of Trump's envelope flickered between satellite missile test data and updated Russian trade graphs. The message was clear. The world had changed, and so had the game. Kim no longer danced to Washington's rhythm. He had new music now, played from Moscow and whispered in Beijing. Recent movements spoke volumes. North Korea's rare arms talks with Russian military officials, the sudden reappearance of joint cyber initiatives, and the quiet increase in resource shipments across the Chinese border weren't just coincidences. They were signals. Kim was no longer the unpredictable outsider begging for attention. He was a planner now, a calculator, a strategist. And silence had become his currency. Trump, meanwhile, watched from a distance he hadn't intended. In his Mar-a-Lago residence, surrounded by luxury and loyalists, he remained uncharacteristically quiet. No tweets, no truth social outbursts, just that same photo of the envelope replayed again and again on cable news. Fox called it bold, MSNBC labeled it pathetic. But the real verdict came from Kim, and it came wrapped in stillness. Advisors insisted the letter wasn't a political move. He genuinely believes he can open doors no one else can, one aide whispered. But belief doesn't change geopolitics. And this time, the door stayed closed. No cameras, no summit, no handshake over concrete slabs. Just a room, an empty chair, and a letter that never got read. In Washington, foreign affairs panels speculated. Had Trump misread Kim's evolution? Did he underestimate how far North Korea had drifted from spectacle? The answer settled heavily in the air. Yes. And more than that, he had misread his own place in the story. The era of showmanship diplomacy was closing. Theatrics no longer held weight, and gestures without reciprocation were relics. In that moment, the world didn't just witness a rejected letter. It witnessed a reshuffling of presence, a new kind of Cold War, not fought with tanks, but with tone. And Kim? He didn't have to raise his voice. He had already won the moment by walking away from it. The letter was gone now. No ceremony, no archive. Just gone. Somewhere between diplomatic hands and janitorial duty, it vanished. No statement from Pyongyang, no photo op from Mar-a-Lago. What lingered wasn't the paper, but the pause it created. The unanswered breath between two names, once shouted across continents. Trump and Kim. Now, both stood on opposite sides of a silence neither could claim. For Trump, this wasn't defeat in the traditional sense. There were no battlegrounds, no treaties, no broken deals. Just space. Empty, humming space, where relevance used to be. In interviews, he dodged questions. When asked about the letter, he pivoted to border policy, inflation, anything but that quiet moment when the envelope was left untouched. For a man who fed on feedback, cheers, boos, headlines, the absence was starvation. Kim, by contrast, said nothing. His stillness was sculpted, deliberate. A message without ink. He didn't need to humiliate. He didn't need to explain. His power lay in restraint. The world noticed. Allies shifted. Adversaries blinked. In a global arena obsessed with noise, Kim had mastered silence and made it echo. Across the Atlantic, European diplomats read between the gestures. Some called it strategic maturity. Others, chilling arrogance.
But all agreed. The era of emotional diplomacy was shrinking. Theatrics were being replaced by cold calculus. And the man who once walked across the DMZ, who once claimed to have solved North Korea, was now left knocking on a door no one opened. In Washington, think tanks met behind frosted glass, asking questions with no clean answers. Had Trump empowered Kim or merely entertained him? Had the bromance softened a dictator or legitimized one? History, as always, would decide later. But one truth already crystallized. Silence had become a sovereign act. At night, Mar-a-Lago dimmed early. The letter, once a symbol of return, now existed only in headlines and speculation. No framed photo, no copy in a memoir draft, just a vanished envelope, and a former president replaying the quiet over and over in his mind. What had he written? What had he hoped for? And most of all, did he truly believe Kim would ever write back?